Hi there, Medical Wildcats. I'm Joseph Guggenheim. I'm a 1972 alum of the medical school, and this month my topic is the 1918 Spanish influenza pandemic, which not only affected Chicago, but actually the entire world. It was thought that this was a virulent strain of influenza probably brought over from China. It was called the Spanish flu not because of a high incidence in Spain, but because Spanish news was not blacked out during World War I like much of Europe's news. This strain of flu killed more people than the war itself or any previous disease, with the exception of the bubonic plague. It was estimated that 20 to 50 million people died worldwide, and perhaps maybe 100 million due to poor record keeping. 1/3 of the world's population was infected, and 500 million people. The earliest documented cases in the United States were in March 1918 at a military base, Camp Funston in Kansas. On September 18, 1918, a few sailors at the Great Lakes Naval Station north of Chicago fell ill. 50,000 sailors in this base were given daily doses of nose and throat sprays. All leaves were canceled, but visitors were still permitted. A week later, 7 Army cadets at Northwestern University's Student Army Training Corps became ill. This was the early predecessor of ROTC. It affected the North Shore. On September 20th, there were nearly 100 cases reported in Lake Forest, 60 cases at Fort Sheridan, and 50 cases in Winnetka. And on the right, you see the Army Hospital in Kansas at Camp Funston. By mid-October in the United States, there were more than 2,000 cases and 5,000 deaths per day from the influenza and pneumonia. Flu cases peaked on October 17th. It infected approximately 40% of the U.S. Navy and 36% of the U.S. Army. In the United States, there were 500,000 to 675,000 deaths. The flu did not affect the war, but the war affected the flu. The flu was seen in all countries approximately equally, but the war increased the incidence of the disease because of its spread. Army recruits were in barracks in crowded situations, and they were transported in military vehicles in crowded facilities. Nearly half the victims were between ages 20 and 40. And in this graph, you can see on the right of the death rate versus age. You can see from 1911 to 1917, the incidence was fairly high in the young people and in the old people. But in 1918, there was a peak between ages 40 and 20 and 40. This was the majority of deaths were due to secondary pneumonia. This incidence in the 20s to 40s was kind of paradoxical. You would think that these healthy people would have a stronger immunity, but it was postulated they had a strong immune response, which was called the cytokine storm, causing them to have a strong immune system with a more severe disease. The peak age group was between 20 and 40. The epidemic lasted from September 21st to November 16th in the Chicago area. There were 38,000 cases of the Spanish flu and more than 13,000 cases of secondary pneumonia. Somewhere between 8,500 and 14,000 Chicagoans died. The annualized death rate jumped from 1.08 per thousand in September 1918 to 6.5 per thousand in October 1918. It peaked on October 17th with 382 deaths attributed to flu or pneumonia. But the Chicagoans appeared to be more interested in the war than in the pandemic. The desperate Chicagoans were easy victims for quackery, and you can see some of the treatments that were tried: mustard oil, tobacco-less cigarettes, balm to be put at the nostrils, and even special underwear for men. About 25% of the prescriptions for Spanish flu were containing narcotics. The Chicago Department of Health recommended all the fresh air and sunshine you could get, and such things as sulfur, cucumbers, potatoes, and a herbal treatment, asafoetida, was tried. None of these were effective. And wearing a bag of camphor around the neck was thought to prevent flu. as you can see in these boys on the right. The Chicago Commissioner of Health was Dr. John Dill Robertson, who was a graduate of the Bennett Medical College, which was called an eclectic medical school in Chicago. Bennett later became Loyola. It's unsure how much that Robertson had to do with this. Robertson was appointed Commissioner of Health for Chicago in 1927. The Chicago Tribune labeled him His Highness and His Eminence because of the way he had decrees for what was good for the population of Chicago. On September 20th, he recommended the following to avoid the disease. Don't overeat, don't get the surface of your body chilled, don't remain in crowded areas, don't get constipated, don't sleep less than 8 hours, don't get your feet wet, etc., etc. And he was accused of parenting. All these were just common sense with no scientific basis. The Surgeon General at the time was Dr. Rupert Blue. He recommended a proper proportion of work, play, and rest. He was the U.S. Surgeon General from 1912 to 1920 and president of the AMA 1916 to 17. Recommendations by the medical establishment were based on ideologically appealing messages with no scientific basis. The middle class recommendations were for people to isolate the patients, avoid crowds, pay attention to diet and rest, temperance, sunshine, and fresh air, all common sense modalities. Other things that were recommended were gauze masks, which were proven to be completely ineffective, avoidance of wet feet, rest, baths, and regular bowels. Military metaphors became popular during World War I, and posters such as the one on the right were placed in public transportation areas. Gas masks were used to denote gauze masks. Sneezes were called explosions. Germs were called bombs. And the police would give a warning to Chicagoans if they noticed them spitting. But if the spitter showed disrespect or repeatedly spit, they could be arrested. The 3 C's were also recommended: clean mouth, clean skin, and clean clothes. Dr. Robertson banned public dancing due to the fact, he said, it had close contact between the dancers. The dance consisted of exercise. There was frequent chilling of the body following dancing, and there was unusually heavy breathing. He also closed theaters and movie houses, night schools, places of public amusement, skating rinks, and lodges. On October 18th, he closed all public gatherings that were not essential to the war effort, such as banquets, conventions, lectures, social affairs, athletic contests, and cabarets. However, he did not close schools, churches and synagogues, or restaurants and taverns. He said children could be observed more closely at school than at home. The absentee rate was already 30 to 50%, and some mischievous children would sniff black pepper to induce coughing and sneezing so they could avoid school. Restaurants and taverns were necessary because many families at that time did not have refrigerators to keep food fresh at home. Churches and synagogues were thought to be necessary to preserve morale, and clergy were urged to keep the sermons short, and houses of worship were required to have adequate ventilation. It was thought that if citizens partied on Saturday night, they were urged to sleep late on Sunday. And arteries of business, whatever that was, were supposed to remain open. Other attempts to control the flu included making telephone calls only when they were necessary. Because of the shortage of telephone operators, Robertson discouraged making telephone calls unless they were absolutely necessary. L cars were recommended to have adequate ventilation, and he ordered a ban on smoking on the L, which has become permanent. And landlords who did not heat their buildings adequately would be fined. Robertson believed that if theaters were closed, people would go home and go to bed early and get rest to preserve, as he said, the body's energy and physical strength. Police were ordered to stop spitters, coughers, and sneezers that did not cover their mouth and nose. He gradually reopened the city. Beginning on October 29th, he began to open certain facilities. Music and entertainment venues, restaurants, and hotels were opened on the 29th. Beginning on the 30th, theaters and movie houses south of Howard Street, the border between Evanston and Chicago, were opened as far south as Diversey Parkway. On November 1st, the rest of the city was open, and all public places were required to close by 10 p.m. On November 4th, dancing could be resumed. The pandemic affected the football season at Northwestern, the 1918 season. This is a picture of the 1918 team. Their name was the Purple. The name Wildcats was not used until 1924. War regulation said that sports will be run as an adjunct to military development and not as the main issue in college life. Practice was limited to only 90 minutes per day. There would be no overnight trips in October, and teams could only have 2 overnights in November. Northwestern held its first practice on October 16th. Players on the Evanston campus and Chicago campus had to practice separately. According to the Tribune, flu had been found in Northwestern dormitories on October 20th. During the last week of October, 5 players left Northwestern due to military duty, so the Northwestern was left with an inadequate number of players. The game against Ohio State was canceled on October 19th. Students faced many restrictions on campus. Trips to Chicago were forbidden. Churches, theaters, and other public gatherings in Evanston were closed, and the university prohibited hangouts in dorm rooms. So I don't know where they were supposed to hang out, but not in dorm rooms. The first scheduled game on October 12th was against Knox College, and that was canceled. And after they canceled the game against Ohio State, Northwestern had no game for October 19th. So they hurried to schedule a game against Michigan Agricultural College, which is now Michigan State. The team was known as the Aggies, but 4 Aggies developed the flu, so that game was canceled. With 2 days left to find an opponent for the October 19th date, Northwestern found Great Lakes Naval Training Station. The game was scheduled for 2:30 in the afternoon with free admission. It was played in ankle-deep mud, but many felt that it was the best game of the weekend. The teams battled to a 0-0 tie. Great Lakes finished the season without a loss and went on to the Rose Bowl. The November 2nd game against Michigan was canceled when the Michigan State Board of Health forbade the Wolverines from traveling to Evanston. So now Northwestern did not have a November 2nd game. But the Wolverines wanted to avenge their 21-12 loss from 1917, but the State Board of Health would not allow them to travel. So the Ohio State game, which was scheduled for November 2nd, originally, remember, scheduled for October 19th, was canceled again by the health authorities in Ohio. With 1 day left to find an opponent for the November 2nd game, Northwestern arranged to play United States Auxiliary Naval Reserve School, also known as the Municipal Pier. The game was played in Evanston. Municipal Pier dominated 25-0, and the Pier finished the season undefeated. On November 4th, the sports ban was lifted. Northwestern finished the season by defeating Knox College 47-7, and University of Chicago 21-6, but lost to Iowa 23-7. So they finished with a 2-2-1 record. So in retrospect, there seemed to be more interest in the war with Germany than there was with the pandemic. Chicagoans seemed to ignore, resent, or rebel against the official decrees. They were divided between a powerful minority and a passive majority. And whether due to Robertson's actions or not, Chicago had a lower death rate than many cities the same size. So let's get together again virtually next month. In order to commemorate the opening of the new Ryan Field, my topic will be the history of the Big Ten. In the meantime, stay healthy, stay connected, and I look forward to our session next month.